I discovered 6 unbelievable tales from truckers that will haunt you long after. I never should have opened that door. As I cracked it just a smidge, a chill ran down my spine. My everyday normalcy shattered. It was just another late-night drive with the hum of the road wrapping around me, the engine's low growl lulling me into a trance. I reached for my coffee, its warmth comforting in the still. But then, the radio fizzled, static prickling the air. I brushed it off until I heard the whispers. A voice, low and gravelly, glided through the crisp night. It sent a shock through my veins. The darkness swallowed the road ahead as shadows flickered like specters playing tricks on my mind. Did I see something move? Or was it just my imagination? The smell of diesel lingered, mixed with the sharp scent of fear. My heart raced, pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribcage. I inched further into the abyss of night. I could almost read the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from the trailer behind me. I slammed my foot on the brake, tires screeching in protest. My breath hitched. Someone was out there. The hairs on my neck stood. Frozen in dread, I turned my head slowly, scanning the darkness. Just then, I caught a glimpse of a figure. It was gone before I could blink. My heart skipped, pounding harder as panic dripped in cold beads down my back. My mind raced with dread-filled stories from ghostly truckers. The phantom hitchhiker, the shadow figure haunting the highways, lives lost under lonely skies, their fates tangled, waiting to share their tales with the living. But why here? Why now? A creaking sound sent ice coursing through my veins. I leaned closer to the door, heart in my throat. Just as I was about to call out, a scream sliced through the stillness. The air shattered, and I stumbled backward. What was that? My pulse thundered, fear pooling in the pit of my stomach. I had to know if I really heard it. For a second, I hesitated, staring into the dark void. But curiosity clawed at my insides, urging me to step closer. One more glance. But then the door slammed shut. I jumped back, my breath caught. I was not alone. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The darkness wrapped around my truck like a vice, suffocating any glimmer of hope. I pressed my back against the cool metal, heart thumping so hard I feared it might shatter inside me. The door, my only line of defense, had betrayed me, slamming shut with a malevolent will of its own. My breath was shallow, eyes darting toward the shadows that crept with a life of their own. The metallic scent of fear mixed with the burnt rubber from my tires, thickening the air. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms as the memory of that scream clawed at my sanity. Another sound pulled me from the depths of my terror, soft, rhythmic tapping. It resonated from the trailer, a haunting echo that sent jolts of raw panic through my veins. I froze, unable to move, every neuron screaming for me to flee. But my body remained glued to the spot, paralyzed by the unknown. And then it came again, the tapping quicker this time, almost frantic. I locked my gaze on the trailer's rearview mirror. The air shimmered, as if it were alive, and shadows flickered in its depths. The whispers grew louder, those gravelly voices colliding with my racing thoughts. Help us, they pleaded, twisting around my mind. Don't leave us. The pit in my stomach turned as dread washed over me. I remembered the tales the truckers saying they'd transported more than just cargo. Spirits bound to the road, lost between dimensions, yearning to be freed, luring others into their eternal trap. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone. Light piercing the dark, it felt necessary for sanity as the beam broke through the blackness. It caught movement. My heart leapt into my throat. A figure, cloaked in wispy shadows, hovered just beyond the reach of the light. Its form was indistinct, eyes glinting like midnight stars filled with pain. The whispers surged. A chorus of despair echoed through the night. Join us, the voice wrapped around me, echoing deeply within my chest, drawing me closer, suffusing my mind with despair. I can't. I stammered, shaking my head violently. I stumbled away from the light, backing into the cab of my truck, slamming the door shut, though I knew it offered little safety. It wasn't the outside I feared. It was what might already be inside. Then I heard a soft scratching from beneath the truck, a slithering sound that made my skin crawl. I dared a glance under the vehicle, my heart pounding as my flashlight wavered. The beam fell upon an indistinct figure crawling with a sickening grace. It was nearly devoid of substance, but its filthy hands clawed relentlessly toward me. A grotesque mockery of human desperation. "Help us," it rasped again, and the very sound wrapped itself around me, squeezing until I could barely breathe. Desperation clawed at my insides as if I were drowning in their cries, pulled into the depths of their anguish. "No!" I shouted, the word bursting from my lips, a primal scream echoing into the night. Then, with a deafening roar, the trailer door swung open, revealing a sight so horrifying that my mind scrambled to comprehend it. A multitude of figures poured from the shadows, their faces twisted in sorrow and rage, eyes void of life yet filled with a desperate longing. "Help us!" The wail surged like a tidal wave, crashing over me. I turned to my phone once more, fingers shaking as I dialed "Flee, flee, flee," screamed within my soul. But as I pressed the call button, the truck's lights flickered and died, plunging me into utter darkness. "Leave us alone!" I cried out, scrambling backward, but the shadows surged forward, enveloping me in a cold embrace. I felt a pull, as if the air around me thickened, weighing me down, swallowing my resistance. My vision blurred, and just before the darkness took me, I glimpsed the driver's seat through the rearview mirror. It was occupied. A figure sat behind the wheel, watching me with hollow eyes, a twisted grin breaking across its face. In that instant, as the shadows closed in and the world dissolved into chaos, a question burned in the pit of my stomach. Who was in control now? Then the darkness swallowed me whole, the last glimpse of the haunting figure lingering like an omen as I spiraled toward the unknown abyss. I was trapped beneath the weight of darkness, a thick shroud of despair pressing me down as though the essence of the shadows themselves had come alive. Time lost meaning beneath that crushing void, moments dragging into eternity, as panic clutched at my throat like a noose. With a sudden heave, the pressure released, and I gasped for air, my senses returning with stark clarity. But I was no longer in my truck. Instead, I lay sprawled on the cold, damp ground, gasping, the scent of something rancid stinging my nostrils. The shadows receded but did not vanish. They lingered just out of view, like a veil too heavy to lift. That I scrambled to my feet, feeling the clammy earth beneath my palms. The air buzzed with energy, an electric tension that prickled the back of my neck. The night was punctuated by distant echoes, shuffling feet, muted whispers, and the faintest flicker of movement that danced at the edges of my vision. "Help us!" The voices resumed their taunting chant, echoing through the trees surrounding me. They had turned from haunting whispers to a cacophony, tugging at the strings of my sanity. I staggered forward, my heart pounding like a wild drum, but the ground was uneven and slick. Suddenly, a flicker of light caught my eye. A soft glow pulsed against the encroaching shadows, illuminating a narrow path leading deeper into a thicket. There was an allure to the glow, something terribly inviting in the face of the night's terror. Yet a deeper instinct warned me. Whatever lay beyond that light was not meant to be approached. Instinctively, I turned away, hoping to retrace my steps back to my truck, the hellish place now shrouded in mist. Just as I began to weave my way through the dark again, a gut-wrenching laughter echoed from the underbrush, a sound as vile as it was familiar. It was the screeching of those desperate souls, their impatience palpable, and as I turned back towards the glowing light, a shadow lunged from the darkness, knocking me off my feet. The figure before me was a grotesque sight, twisted and ghastly, a mirror of what I had glimpsed in my truck's rearview. Its skin glimmered with an unnatural sheen, dripping shadows that pooled at its feet like ink. "Why do you fight?" it rasped, the voice a dripping, mocking tone. "Don't you want to help us?" I pushed myself backward, scrabbling against the ground as the creature extended a claw-like hand towards me, the gesture both inviting and revolting. The stench of decay filled my lungs, threatening to choke me. "What do you mean?" I managed to choke out, fear mixing with bewilderment. "Join us," it whispered, its hollow eyes burning into mine. "You will never be free as long as you resist." The other voices surged, enveloping me in a symphony of despair. "Help us, we just want to be whole again." I shook my head, willing the madness away, but the whispers grew loud, a cacophony of despair and desperation that resonated within my very bones. It was then I felt a sharp pain, something cold and penetrating pressed against my side. My heart raced as I gripped my torso. Warmth blossomed against my skin, trickling down my side in a shocking crimson stream. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I bolted upright, stumbling backward, but all around me, the shadows thickened, merging into a singular entity vying for my attention. The figure grinned wider, triumphant. Victorious, I summoned every ounce of strength I had left, knowing I had to break free. "No, I'm not like you," I shouted, a desperate attempt to tether my sanity in the face of the horror. I shoved past the creature, feeling something pull at my heels, dragging me toward the glowing path. With a sudden burst of energy, I lunged for the light. In an instant, the darkness convulsed around me, a wild whirlwind of anger rushing to reclaim its prey. I felt fingers cold, spectral, relentless snatch at my clothes, at my skin. The light flickered intensely, blinding me momentarily. Then I was falling, the ground beneath me vanishing into a chasm of darkness, screams echoing like knives around. Just before I plunged into the void, voice curled around me, warm and soothing, yet laced with a chilling familiarity. "Don't leave us." And I realized abruptly that the light was not salvation. It was merely a prelude to something far worse. Beneath the surface of that glowing oasis lay unwritten horrors unknown, and I was destined to descend into their embrace once again. As my body shattered the darkness, the last flicker of light extinguished. The echoes twisted into a single cry, and then silence wrapped around me with the sweet suffocation of despair. Then came the unsettling realization. I was not alone in that void. Something awaited the arrival of my soul. The darkness was thick and impenetrable, a viscous void that swallowed every ounce of sound. My body hung suspended in a strange limbo, neither here nor there. I felt the chill seep into my bones, a barrage of icy fingers prying at my resolve. Somewhere in that unbearable silence, a whisper emerged so faint I questioned my sanity. It echoed off unseen walls, a riddle wrapped in dread that said, "Stay with us forever." I struggled to move, only to find my limbs weighted down by an unseen force, the grip of despair tightening around me like an anaconda squeezing out the last breath of its prey. Memories flickered behind my eyelids, falling leaves, a truck's brake lights illuminating forgotten roads, laughter shared with friends. But those memories were clouds dispersed by the storm gathering in the pit of my stomach. The shadowy figure's laughter reverberated in the darkness, louder now, morphing into a keening wail. "Why do you resist?" The voice cajoled, taunting me between cries. I could feel something pull at the remnants of my consciousness, a craven hunger probing for purchase. The shadows writhed around me, becoming a swirling mass, a distorted reflection of the chaos within my own mind. And then, with a surge of panic, I opened my eyes that I was still bound in that emptiness. Yet there was an unmistakable warmth now, a grotesquely familiar glow emanating somewhere from the depths. I was not alone, for before me stood a spectral assembly of faces, hollow and sunken, their eyes wells of eternal sorrow. They formed a circle, chanting in unison, their voices merging into a haunting mantra of anguish. "Join us, you'll understand." Among them was a visage I recognized, twisted yet all too familiar, a fellow trucker I had once shared tales with at a roadside diner. His eyes, once vibrant and full of life, were now shrouded in the same ethereal glow that enveloped the others, a ghastly sheen dripping from him like ink from a pen. "Why?" I gasped, feeling an overwhelming urge to recoil. "What happened to you?" He smiled, but it was a gnarled severance of warmth. "You'll see soon enough," he replied, his voice layered with dread, reverberating through the shadows. "The night has gifts to offer. If you dare to accept them." A wave of terror washed over me, mingled with morbid curiosity. My life had been tethered to the road for so long. The camaraderie of fellow truckers was my lifeblood, the miles ahead a promise of freedom. But here, I felt trapped, entangled in a web of sacrifice far too intricate to decipher. "Help us," the group urged, stretching their gaunt hands toward me as if I were the last beacon of hope, the final thread of cohesion in their fractured existence. "You can't leave us." The shadows began to pulse, responding to their plea and drawing closer, encasing me in a cocoon of blackness, glittering with the despair of those lost to the void. I could feel their longing gripping my heart, a chorus of memories intertwining with each plea. "Accept it," they urged. "You too will understand our pain." A deep ache settled in my chest, overwhelming me with a torrent of unshed tears. The thick fog around me swirled, revealing snippets of their lives as truckers. Each vision replayed a tragedy. A collision with a phantom vehicle, an unseen cliff, wildlife leaping unexpectedly from the thicket. But these accidents felt intentional, orchestrated. The voices rose again, now frantic. "Remember," they cried, the urgency seeping into my bones. "You've seen them before they find you. They won't stop. Accept us and escape their wrath." I realized then that the true horror was not just in their demise but in the way they clung to me, desperately seeking to infect my soul with their despair, to make me a twisted part of their endless suffering. I could feel Ida's presence lurking, watching, waiting for me to break, to surrender to their cry. Just as I began to fathom the weight of their grief, the darkness splintered, a rift tearing open before me. A stark white light shone through the fissures, illuminating the gnarled faces around me with stark clarity. The darkness shrieked, in agony, twisting like a living thing, desperate to reclaim its prisoners. "Don't you see?" the familiar face begged, his eyes now wild, filled with urgent insanity. "It's the only way to survive." I fought against the waves of fear, my instincts screaming to resist the alluring light. But as I moved towards it, the shadows latched onto me, pulling, begging me to stay in their embrace. "You're one of us now," the shadows hissed, their tone condescending. "You cannot escape what you are destined to become." With one last desperate cry from my fellow trucker, "Join us," the shadows howled, pulling me closer as the bright light flickered fiercely, threatening to consume us all. Just as I reached my hand toward the blinding white, another scream shattered the air, a voice far more horrifying, a guttural, relentless wail that sent tremors through me and pushed me to the edge of oblivion. "Stay in the darkness with us." My mind reeled. A choice lay before me, a terrifying inevitability surging within the choice to join those trapped in their sorrow, or to take a leap into the unknown. Yet, just as I made my decision, the light exploded into a million shards, a blinding brightness swallowing everything, and then I was falling once more into the chasm. But this time, something else accompanied me, a familiar heartbeat thudding steadily, drawing closer, vengeful and intent on tearing me apart. And in that moment, between realms of despair and the light, I understood that whatever awaited me would be far worse than any shadow. The abyss consumed me, dragging me down through a maelstrom of fragmented memories and howls of anguish. It was as if I were plunging into an ink-black sea, limitless and formless, where the weight of regret threatened to smother my will to breathe. I felt the heartbeat echoing through my body, a rhythm that resonated with an insatiable hunger. It thrummed in time with the desperate pleas of the forsaken souls around me. A dull thud that quickened with every passing second. Panic seized me. I had thought I could choose, thought I could break free from the cycle of despair that enveloped the lost truckers. But the truth gnawed at the edges of my resolve. The darkness was sentient, and it did not relish the idea of letting go. The monstrous grip of the unseen hands tightened around my throat like a noose, forcing my gaze to the rippling shadows above. "I am your past." A low, guttural voice emerged from the void, seeping into my thoughts like a toxic fog. "And you are my future." The heartbeat grew louder, a violent drum pounding in my chest. I twisted and turned, trying to grasp my desperate state. Yet the whispers surrounded me, morphing into a haunting melody that echoed through the darkness, a symphony of voices lost in an eternal search for redemption. "We are waiting," they sang, their harmonies weaving through my mind, blurring the borders of reality and torment. Suddenly, as if pulled through a dark funnel, the ground beneath me solidified, and I landed with a heavy thud. Disoriented, I blinked against the stark white light that flooded my vision, illuminating an expansive, derelict truck stop, littered with shattered glass and abandoned vehicles, remnants of those who had come before me. Time stood still, suspended as I took in the ghostly remnants of lives disrupted, the faint scent of oil and rust heavy in the air. But it wasn't the fading echo of humanity that struck me. It was the realization that I now stood among the spectral assembly of truckers I had met in the darkness, all their mournful gazes fixated upon me, an unbroken circle of despair once again. Yet this time, they wore expressions of muted anticipation, as if my arrival alone could breathe life into their stagnant existence. "Welcome back," hissed the familiar figure, his face contorted yet oddly peaceful. "You brought hope." "Hope?" I balked, scanning their gaunt forms. "You call this hope?" Each of their hollow cheeks seemed to cower beneath the weight of their affliction. "What is this place? What do you want from me?" The ground trembled subtly, the air thickening with oppressive despair. "What we wanted was to escape," the fellow trucker replied, gesturing around. "But escape requires sacrifice, and you've already begun to pay the price." As clouds heavy with unnamable dread loomed overhead, I turned my gaze to the horizon. The dimming glow of twilight was engulfing the landscape, suffocating my instincts. I stumbled backward as dark figures emerged from the shadows, phantoms dragging chains, their faces transmuted by torment. They wore trucker uniforms, age-worn and marked by spectral stains that flickered ominously in the pale light. Bound to the road, they chanted, their voices rising in a chilling underlying harmony that synchronized with the heartbeat still thrumming within me. Only the lost can find the way. Each step they took resonated with the sharp clang of metal and snapping bones, and my heart raced, a wild crescendo cascading into panic once more. I turned to the surrounding truckers, searching their faces for answers, for guidance. "What is this? How do we escape?" "They can never escape." A new voice cut through the panic, smirking through the shadows. A figure detached itself from the forlorn assembly, cloaked in a cloak that dripped with shadows, as if woven from the darkness itself. "They've forgotten what it means to live." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet as if it were alive, pulsating with an eagerness that left me unsteady. "You're lying," I shouted, desperation lacing my words. "I refuse to accept this." "Then refuse no longer," the figure urged, its voice slithering into my ear, filled with dreadful ardor. With a flick of its wrist, it conjured an imagia flash of my life that felt like daily routine, flickering moments of joy, yet layered beneath all was the chilling sense of inevitability. "You will run and you will fall just as the rest." I in an instant. The air thickened with a forceful wave of panic, as the ground shook violently beneath me, sending the spectral gathering into frenzied chaos. The light began to dim, the trucks reappearing like ghastly silhouettes, rusting away into nothingness. I staggered backward, tripping over the remnants of long-forgotten dreams, just as I felt the darkness attempting to reclaim me. A bright flash erupted overhead, illuminating the faces around me, an exodus of souls screaming in agony, trapped in an endless loop of despair. "Choose, choose," they wailed, the intensity of their cries clawing at my sanity. And then, I heard a thunderous crash that shattered the ghostly mirage, reverberating through my bones, as the looming darkness roared to life, engulfing everything in its path. In that critical moment, the heartbeat ceased, a deafening silence stretching thin, that morbid sound replaced by a cacophony of sinister laughter. Then, before me, the very ground trembled as a fierce light burst through the shadows, a herald of malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. From behind the veil, something far more monstrous than I had ever imagined emerged. A creation born from the nightmares of those trapped souls. A pair of eyes emerged, crimson and ravenous, locking onto mine. They bore into my soul, and I understood in that instant the true meaning of their cries. It has chosen you. Everything fell away, the ground ruptured, and I was lifted up, consumed by an insatiable horror, swinging between the realms of promise and inevitability, yet this time with the knowledge that the choices I had failed to make would haunt me long after, and as I spiraled, drawn closer to that monstrous eye, a whisper slipped from its depths, chilling my flesh. Welcome back to the road for eternity. The abyss I had just escaped was now a mere whisper, but the terror that awaited me on this derelict truck stop was an insatiable scream. I floated limply in the intangible realm, suspended between existence and something much worse, my heartbeat thudding wildly against the onslaught of impending disaster. I blinked against the harsh fluorescence overhead, disoriented and confused. Yet, the spectral assembly of lost truckers loomed larger, their eyes fixed hungrily on the figure that towered above meth, undulating shadow of horror wrapped in motes of despair. I could feel a shift in them, a quiet tremor that echoed my own internal panic. "Keep your eyes open," whispered a voice, harsh like gravel treading on glass. It was a portly trucker from before, his ruined face twisted in a ghastly grin. "It's watching you, always." "What is it?" My voice trembled, as the crimson eyes behind the monstrous facade watched with wicked delight, savoring my fear. "What does it want?" The truckers sighed in unison, their collective breath hanging thick in the air, as if the very essence of their confinement weighed upon my shoulders. "It feeds on your regret," the man said, a weighty revelation that sunk into my mind like a heavy stone. "It craves your sorrows, your forgotten dreams. That's why we brought you here. But beware, we're not the only ones near at us if summoned by my anxious thoughts." The ground beneath me quaked violently, fissures splitting the asphalt like gaping maws. From the cracks welled putrid steam, a fetid stench that clawed at my throat, mingling with the air thick with despair. The faces of the other truckers warped in horror as shadowy tendrils began to snake forth, writhing and searching, eager to entwine themselves around my limbs. "We are all prisoners," a woman's voice chimed, her gaze horrified yet captivated. "But you have yet to join us beneath the skin of the road. The deeper you walk into despair, the more entangled you become in its lies." Around us, the air shimmered, and the shadows began to coalesce into dreadful forms, misfit apparitions of long-lost truck drivers twisted beyond recognition. Some writhed in silent screams, others silently pointed, beckoning the outstretched fingers of the shadows clawing my way. My heart thundered as I felt the pulse of fear seep into my very being, the unerring awareness that they were all part of something much greater and darker than I had comprehended. Suddenly, the portly trucker lunged forward, desperation etching deep creases into his features. "You cannot let it take you. Fight it with every breath you've got." He grasped my shoulders as if anchoring me to sanity. But the ground beneath him split wider, and the dread tendrils wrapped around his feet like snakes, dragging him backward into the unforgiving abyss. "Oh, no!" I screamed, but his shrieks intermingled with the cacophony of lost souls enveloping us. The ground was a ravenous maw, an anomaly of time and space, eager for the sacrifices it found within its boundaries. The shadows sensed my hesitation, lashings of darkness hissing at me, frantically craving my surrender. Join us, they called in a hypnotic chorus, promising freedom or perhaps just another form of entrapment beneath the surface. It was my decision to make. "What strength resides within you?" the sinister figure drawled, appearing more corporeal, smoke slithering off its elongated limbs. I felt drawn to its magnetism, caught in a web woven from nerves and fear. "Let it go. Embrace the darkness as your own. It is what binds us together. You could become the architect of your fate." Shaking, I fixed my gaze on the others, aggrieved spirits clawing at the reality I once knew. "Fate?" I shouted. "You call this fate?" Suddenly, with a sweeping motion, the figure shattered the fragile equilibrium. "Fate is a vicious serpent," it rasped, "and I am its keeper. Once the chains begin to bind you, they shall tighten until you can't breathe, much less escape. What then, traveler?" In that moment, the weight of the trucker's eyes bore down upon me. I could feel their anguish, could sense their fatal lament hanging thick in the air. The shadows seemed to ripple, a ripple that extended towards me, tendrils curling toward my body as though reaching for what little light still flickered within my soul. Caught in the swell of despair and danger, I chose instinct over understanding. I drove myself backward, the weight of 100 eyes tracking my movements, each movement an acknowledgement of all I stood to lose. The ground roared again, a violent tremor pitching me sideways as I refused to dive head first into the growing maw of that darkness, even as the spine-chilling laughter of the figure echoed behind me. It was a cackle of sinister joy, an orchestra of horrors accompanying my retreat. "Why run?" the voice commanded, echoing in the void. "You already belong, whether you accept it or not." Then suddenly, a sharp report rang out, a resounding crack that shattered the false reality surrounding us. A fiery burst blazed across the sky, illuminating the twisted faces of lost souls momentarily suspended in their torment. I shielded my eyes from the light, disoriented and desperate as the air vibrated every sense in my body. But in the fleeting luminescence, everything fractured again. The dilapidated truck stop, the figures, the encroaching shadows, all of it splintered apart. I could feel the very ground beneath me pulling and twisting as if reality were unraveling, and somewhere amidst the swirling chaos, a voice rose, more sinister and haunting than others. "Remember, every choice leads you deeper into the endless night." Then it reached for me, that terrible being, its twisting fingers closing in, with one last agonizing breath. I felt the very fabric of the world tear around me, the last glimmer of hope swallowed whole as I spiraled into a yawning void. In that disorienting plunge, silence settled around me like a shroud. Yet a faint sound more dire than despair emerged, echoing through the chasms. "You cannot escape the road." The silence was deafening, yet it was not empty. The darkness pulsed and breathed like a living thing, wrapping itself around me in an intimate embrace that threatened to suffocate. I drifted in a void of uncertainty. The lurking despair that once enveloped the truck stop now snaked around me like a trustless partner in a macabre dance. Then came the whispers, the chilling cacophony of voices overlapping, layered like a grotesque symphony of the damned. "Hold on," one voice urged, desperate and frantic, while another scoffed. "You think you're special? Look where you are." As the sounds swirled, I strained against the weight of their intentions, vainly attempting to pry myself away from the gravity of their wretched pull. "Remember us." Another chant rose above the turmoil, blending into an abominable harmony. These lost souls were not just ethereal hunts. They had stories buried within them, tales smeared with echoes of regret, all seeking an audience in my fragile psyche. The mental images they conjured were vivid: a truck careening off the road, burning debris falling like stars, the lamenting screams of families shattered by their absence. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the murmurs coalesced into one voice. The sinister entity materialized in my mind's eye, a grotesque visage grinning with malicious glee. "You thought escaping was an option? You've merely traded one nightmare for another." It crooned, its tone sickly sweet as honey, weaved with cruelty. Shivering, I clawed at the veil of darkness around me, desperately seeking substance, a point of reference. With no ground beneath my feet, I imagined the familiar road I had traversed, the winding asphalt studded with taillights and the distant sound of engines droning into the night. Each thought was met with derision, the shadows whispering that those memories were but fading embers, desiccated without fuel. Just then, a glimmer of light broke through the suffocating darkness. A tremulous spark flared before me and expanded, illuminating shadowy outlines of the truckers I had seen before. Their eyes glinted with a wildness born of madness and despair, but understanding lay beneath the surface. They floated, suspended in the same nightmarish limbo I had plummeted into. Within their haunted gazes, I saw the depth of pain mirrored back at me, a reflection of my soul's plight. "What do you want?" I cried, reaching out to them with tremulous desperation. "Help me." But they merely watched as specters of suffering, a pallor creasing their ghostly features. Whispers rolled off their tongues, fragments of stories turning to ash in the air. "Too late," muttered a gaunt man, his voice thin like autumn leaves. "You follow the road now. You are bound to its turns, its curves." "No, I refuse to," I shouted, clenching my fists in defiance, shards of strength igniting in my veins. But as I blinked, the light began to fade, swallowed by the monstrous void around me. My heart raced. The suffocating ambience thickened, the suffocating fingers of despair ready to pull me down into the depths. Suddenly, from the darkness, a guttural growl reverberated, a thonic rumble that thundered through the landscape of despair. Tremors ripped through the air, shaking my core as the shadows began to swirl in a violent frenzy, coiling around me with stinging violence. "The road is your prison now," the entity roared, a cacophony of all the spirits caught dancing within their own horror. And then, with a chilling clarity, I saw it, an unending highway merging into an impossibly infinite void. Beneath that relentless stretch of asphalt lay endless graves painted with the muted hues of forgotten existence. Each grave pulsed with an energy that mirrored my own heart, rhythms resounding in sync with my frantic breaths. "Breathe," the bike rider man began, his form flickering like an unresolved memory. "You have to accept us. The road is alive. It needs you to live." Before I could grasp the idea, a blinding light exploded through the fabric of the void, visceral and raw, fracturing reality around me. I was jolted, careening through a tunnel of distorted time. The sudden jolt tossed me into another place, another realm chaotic enough to dissolve the remnants of my sanity. I landed hard, sprawling on a cold surface that sent tremors up my limbs. Flashes of light illuminated my surroundings. Grotesque parodies of a truck stop stood before me, a grotesque caricature of the previous haunt, now vibrating with an unknown energy. Familiar faces basked in this unsettling glow of dread. A skeletal figure emerged, one masked by shadows, pointing a bony finger at me. "You cannot escape. You cannot hide. You belong here, on this road of despair." And with horror wrapping around my throat, I glanced around, the painful memories staring back in disbelief. The shadows swirled, dark tendrils creeping closer, this time twining around my ankle like a long-lost friend. Whatever remnants of light were left in my spirit began to flicker out, leaving me struggling under the weight of their expectancy. I screamed, scrambling against the advancing shadows, writhing in my fight to hold onto that last shred of hope. But the darkness stretched and twisted with an unnatural hunger, ready to consume everything I was, everything I had. As the figure leaned closer, a wicked grin painted across its macabre countenance. I felt the darkness wrapping tighter, chorus voices rising in exultation. "Finally you will know," they chanted, the shadows intertwining in a crescendo of dread. The final thought echoed in my mind, louder than my racing heart. This is just the beginning. With that horrifying realization reconciling with my soul, I felt myself plummet as the light dimmed to a whisper, and then, abruptly, it was gone. And that's when I heard its roaring laughter echoing through the abyss, drowning me in the hollow prayer of the road. "You cannot escape what you choose to forget." The laughter clawed at my insides, a dissonant symphony of triumph reverberating through the air, as I fell deeper into the chasm of this waking nightmare. The shadows were merciless, relentlessly tightening their grip. Each breath felt heavier, laden with long-forgotten despair that clung to the edges of my consciousness like mildew on rotting wood. The ground beneath me warped, contorting into a grotesque tapestry of asphalt and bone, where cracks oozed with a thick, tar-like substance. Images flickered through this morbid landscape, a flash of headlights slicing through fog, a silhouette of a driver slumped in a truck, eyes vacant yet pleading. Each vision jolted through me like an electric shock, underscoring the terrible reality I now faced. I forced my gaze upward, searching for the skeletal figure amongst the polluted ether. Instead, I found the faces of the truckers, their eyes wide and hollow, drawn into this nightmarish realm alongside me. Their mouths moved in synchronicity, now whispering tales of blood-stained roads and ghostly encounters, punctuated by the low growl of the approaching darkness. "Listen," a spectral woman cried out, her pallid visage flickering like a dying flame. "You must know what the road wants. It hungers for the tales we've left behind, a symphony composed of sorrow and sacrifice." My heart raced as I began piecing together fragments of their stories, the desperate whispers of those who had been claimed by the asphalt, their essence entwined within the very fabric of this sinister highway. Echoes of grief and longing collided, the energy swirling like a tempest around me, squeezing my heart in a vice of dread. And the heart of every truck stop. Something waits. A gaunt man interjected, his voice a rasping shadow. Something ancient, brooding beneath the surface. A hunger that transcends time, waiting for a soul willing to share its story and sacrifice as its toll. A haunting cry erupted from the gathered shadows, resonating with truths untold. I staggered back, grappling with the implications. Was I merely the latest in a long line of victims, condemned to share my tale with these entities, so they might elevate themselves, consume my fear and despair? With conviction igniting within me, I clawed at the environment, howling fervently, I won't be another lost story. I will escape this madness. But my voice faded into the cacophony, swallowed by the swirling masses of shadow and echoing laughter that reverberated off the cracked pavement. Then, a pulse surged through the ground, resonating between us and invoking a terrible revelation. Shadows bloomed and dark tendrils wormed their way toward me, fingers of darkness reaching hungrily for my essence. I attempted to dart to the side but found my limbs refusing to obey, paralyzed by an invisible force. The truckers erupted in desperate warnings, their cries nearly tearing my heart apart, each call a blaring horn announcing impending doom. They feed on resolve. They seek despair. Hala, a voice shouted, igniting a spark of fear within me. Without realizing, I had begun to teeter on the precipice of surrender. My thoughts clouded over with hopelessness. Suddenly, amidst the chaos, one figure emerged. The unrecognizable skeletal figure stood firm, holding something glistening in its outstretched hand. This is the key to your escape, but to wield it, you must first offer your truth. It croaked, stretching its finger toward me as reality around us warped violently. The shadows hissed, recoiling for a heartbeat before launching themselves en masse, a whispering mass determined to reclaim their narrative. Panic blurred my vision, and I could feel my spirit crumble under the weight of their collective need for homage. What truth? I screamed into the encroaching void, desperate for clarity. What must I give? Your pain feeds us, child, the skeletal figure hissed, its grin sharp enough to draw blood. The essence of your experience will bind you to this road, and only then may you know the road. Just as it spoke those words, a violent tremor shook the ground, and a blinding light illuminated the abyss. The figures elongated, twisting and contorting in unison, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. As despair threatened to overtake me, a cold rush of recognition surged through my heart, a visceral recollection of pain and memories buried deep within. With a ferocious scream, I finally relented, clawing into the abyss of my own memories and reliving the heart-wrenching moments of loss, despair, and betrayal. As the shadows nearest me inhaled my suffering, I felt the flicker of strength begin to carve through the dense blanket of darkness. They erupted in chaotic laughter, but suddenly the laughter shifted, a discordant note crackled in the air. The shadows froze, an unnatural stillness prevailing as anticipation thickened like fog. And in that moment of terrifying clarity, a piercing scream shattered the silence. A sound so familiar that it froze me in place, my blood turning to ice. "Help me!" It echoed, melding with the whispers of despair. The voice was unmistakable. It was mine. Time ceased as I fell deeper into the void, spiraling into a reality from which I feared I would never return. Behind me, the shadows heaved in unison, hungry and thirsty for the fragile whispers of my humanity. And as the last vestiges of my resolve crumbled to dust, I knew this awakening was merely the beginning of something far more grotesque. And then, there it was, a malignant laughter exploding through the air, full of malice and dark promise. As the voices of the damned rose again in a terrifying crescendo. "Welcome home." The laughter resonated in my bones, rushing through the marrow as I teetered on the edge of sanity. My heart thundered within a cage of ribs, barely tethered to life as dread pooled like poison in my stomach. No escape remained, yet the shadows writhed with delight, sensing my acknowledgement of fear, my dawning understanding of their domain home. I murmured unsteadily, feeling the faint remnants of my identity slipping through the cracks of this nightmare. How could I belong here among these restless souls who had been unceremoniously crumpled into the pavement of this blackened road? In that instant, the irresistible hunger radiating from them became suffocating, a thick fog that embedded itself deep in my lungs. I turned sharply, caught in the weight of their glistening gazes, each pair a glint of lost humanity encased in despair. They were waiting for something. I could sense their anticipation like the electric charge of an oncoming storm. A bone-chilling whisper slithered from one of the Shadowsa women with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, her voice soft yet resonant. The truth you offered them was but a morsel, not enough to satiate their hunger. They crave the depths of your darkness, the secrets whispered into the night. You must delve deeper. With each word she spoke, the ground beneath me shifted again, a ripple of malevolence cascading through the asphalt and bone of this grotesque landscape. I felt the weight of memories I had long buried rise to the surface, wicked surges of betrayal and hopelessness rushing forward like shadows erupting from a grave. Tell us more, the gaunt man urged, his hollow laugh melding with the growing chorus of stubborn whispers. Dive into your bitterness. Let it flow. Let it consume you. A sharper cry cut through the fray. She must feel the pain of those she lost. Only in the depth of grief can the stories of the forgotten find solace. His eyes shone with an otherworldly glimmer, a sinister glow as if he desired to absorb my anguish like a sponge drawing in water. I recoiled, shaking my head violently as if warding off a sinister spell. No, I won't give you that. The desperate cry tumbled from my lips like a child refusing to relinquish their favorite toy, the fear of exposing my wreckage clawing at my throat. But the shadows shifted, inexorably closing the distance, the air heavy with their collective breath like a horde swelling in hunger. They sensed my defiance, my unwillingness to unravel completely in their presence, and their howls intensified with desperation. Give, 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 they wailed, their voices twisting into a cacophony that tore at the fabric of my thoughts. The road has need of sacrifice, the skeletal figure intoned, its eyes alight with an insatiable hunger. Offer yourself unto us. Let the tales of abandonment spill forth. Through your despair, we find freedom. Suddenly, a searing pain lanced through my chest, a fierce reminder of all I held dear, the family I had failed to protect, a fragile past that now lay heavy against the sinews of my heart. No, I cried again, but my voice trembled beneath the rising tide of insistent noise. An echo of desperation crashing against me like waves heaving in a storm. Their laughter washed over me, an intoxicating hiss that tangled with the memories flooding my consciousness. I inhaled sharply, feeling the sharp edges of loss grate against my spirit. You want sacrifice, what will you take from me? I choked out, my voice a whisper draped in dread, almost accepting the inevitable descent. And then I glimpsed Ida, fleeting yet familiar figure clasped in the shadows. One I had thought safe from this malevolence. The dust motes danced around her, illuminating her pale, teary features as she raised her hand to may a child. My child. The realization was horrifying, the awareness tangling itself with raw grief and the unwelcome burden of regret, seeping into my veins like a poison. Mommy? She called, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Help me. No. I screamed, my heart splintering into obscurity at the sight. Get away from her, you monsters. The shadows rippled in excitement, the malignant laughter escalating to a fever pitch, drowning my cries in a tide of malice. Your whole truth or nothing. Would you let her remain lost? They taunted, their words sharp as serrated blades, slicing into my already fragmented soul. Choose, bellowed the skeletal figure, both promise and threat coiling beneath its breath. Give us your darkest truth, or witness her claim. Terror blackened the world around me, spiraling into a vortex of despair. The last vestiges of my will felt unbearably fragile in that momenta gossamer thread swaying in the wind. One desperate choice away from snapping completely. Mommy. Help. The child's voice echoed once more, merging with the sinister laughter reverberating around me. Her innocence hung in the balance as the shadows conspired, ready to summon forth everything I had buried deep within. As the darkness pressed in, I was left with only two choices: to willingly offer the ultimate sacrifice of my truth, or to lose the last glimmer of hope that my heart had ever held. That I end that dreadful moment, I grasped the swirling chaos, my eyes darting between her shining visage and the hungry shadows. With a final fleeting breath, my reality shattered, plunging me toward the inevitable embrace of the malevolent road, where haunting tales demanded their tribute. And as I felt the grasp of darkness tighten around me, a chilling silence subdued the laughter, whispering only one word that hung heavy in the air like a curse: choose. I gasped as reality twisted and churned around me, and suddenly, I was back in the truck, the familiar cab enveloping me in an embrace both comforting and dreadfully perilous. The engine purred, and the hum of the road beckoned once more. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, my heart racing as I recalled the horrors I'd faced, the endless whispers of desperation that echoed still in my mind. The battle had ended, or so I thought. Glancing in the rearview mirror, my breath hitched. There was no one there, just the black void of the night stretching behind me. But the fear lingered, a sense that the shadows I had faced were not done with me yet. The shadows wanted to eat my memories, slice through my very being until nothing remained. A chime of laughter echoed faintly from somewhere just beyond the edges of perception, sending chills racing down my spine. "Stay with us," a voice cooed, just loud enough to lure me into torment. And in that moment, a visceral realization flooded my senses. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help, but as I turned it on, the screen cracked and sputtered. It wasn't just black. It was marred with moisture, as if the abyss had offered its own version of communication, enveloping me in darkness once more. I felt dizzy, the weight of the stories I had unwillingly embraced clawing at the back of my mind. Through the radio static, voices began to rise, penetrating the silence like a symphony of torment. "Join us, help us," I gritted my teeth, the panic clawing at the edges of my defiance. "No, I am not yours to take," I shouted into the abyss, feeling my body tremble under the sheer weight of their collective gaze. 1,000 eyes watching, waiting for my resolve to shatter. But the shadows were relentless, and as the tires rolled over the uneven terrain of a familiar road, the realization hit me. I was not alone. I would never be alone again. Suddenly, the lights ahead flickered, the glow of another truck stop hovered in the distance, bathed in eerie luminosity. On instinct, I pressed the gas, feeling the engine roar beneath me as fear surged through my veins. I had to make it there, had to seek some semblance of safety, but even as I drove faster, the weight of the ever-watchful shadows hung heavy on my conscience. As I neared the stop, the lights began to dim, shadows creeping out from alleyways much like hungry beasts. Without thinking, I flung the truck into a parking spot, engine still roaring. I shot a glance at the retro diner, its neon sign buzzing ominously. There was no one around. Empty tables sat under dim lights, rusting utensils scattered carelessly around like familial secrets long lost. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door, stepping into the staccato silence of the diner. The faint scent of stale coffee hung in the air, mixing with something inexplicably foul. An icy chill crawled up my spine as I stepped further inside. "Hello?" I called, my voice wavering, echoing slightly against the cold tiles. That was when I saw them. The truckers, their bodies slumped against the booths, faces pallid and sunken, aimed towards me with hollow eyes flickering with desperate hope. "You've finally come," one hissed, mouth cracking into a grim smile that was anything but reassuring. "We've been waiting for you." They pulled me deeper into their whispers, weaving tales of lost hopes and eternal suffering. "You are one of us now." The shadows beckoned from outside, their tendrils reaching toward the glass like pained fingers aching to reclaim what they had lost. "Join us, and we shall be free forever." "And oh," I hissed, shaking my head vehemently. But as I stepped back, I realized the door had silently shut behind me, sealing my fate with a low click that reverberated ominously in my skull. Nowhere to go, nowhere to run. The diner blurred at the edges, shadows bleeding through into reality, forging memories I had fought so hard to escape. I felt panic bubble up, a desperate urge to flee, but my legs rebelled, frozen in place. This can't be happening. I screamed, but my voice barely registered against the quiet chorus of their desperate pleas. I was not just seeing shadows anymore. I was feeling their stories weaving into my own, regret mingling with bitterness and despair. Together, we will caress the road, the multitude murmured, swaying like a hypnotic sea of grief. Then came a true weight of horror that sank deep into my stomach and clawed at my throat. I was not their savior. I was simply another lost soul, mingling with the shadows in an eternal dance of despair. As I crumbled to the floor, understanding dawned. The road was not the problem, it had become a sanctuary, a twisted reunion of those who traversed it under the crushing weight of sorrow. Shadows laughed, their whispers invading my mind, sinking deeper, suffocating the last flickers of light. And in that poorly lit diner, I felt every thread of my reality unravel as a single truth emerged, wrapping itself around my heart like a shroud. I would never escape this road. The laughter surrounded me, drowning out the last protest of my dying sanity, as the final strands of my existence snapped. We are the road. With that, the last remnants of my former self dissolved, leaving behind only the echo of my despair, blending seamlessly with the shadows of the damned. And then it was quiet, the silence a chilling reminder that this was my new reality. I was one of them now, destined to haunt the highway forever, a lost chapter, waiting for the next traveler to wander too close and join the tales of tenebrous dread. Welcome to your new life, a whisper brushed my consciousness, heavy with anticipation, promising that the darkness would always linger, a malevolent reminder of the choices made and the paths left untaken. And somewhere in the quiet corners of my thoughts, a single thought rang true. I had opened the door, and now there was no closing it again.